Hello, my name is David, and this is a making of video covering my creative process behind Scary and Strange, my recent animated short film. This includes the ideas and themes behind the artwork, the story, the everything. Enjoy. Scary and Strange is a direct sequel to my previous animated short film, Merry Madness. I was always going to make a sequel to this film. It's one half of a whole. Merry Madness is about duality, light, dark, good and bad, where the first is the Great Rats film. It was orange and brown and about how great and terrible times are equally essential and equally healthy for you. The second, Scary and Strange, is the opposite. It's the Terrible Hounds film. It's purple and pink, and it's about the dangers of overly romanticising those things. They're oddly contradictory, and I think that's the reason they work. Being a direct follow-up, my sketchbook is a little sparse, I'm not gonna lie. This world had already been designed and established. The Great Rat and the Terrible Hound had both already been designed too and sculpted and figured out. I actually got a little bored in my sketchbook and trailed off and started drawing dragons and witches, which may or may not come up again in later short films, we'll see. I've always had a fascination with the surreal, with surrealism in general, and especially how that applies to horror. A lot of my artwork is surreal, and I've always wanted to make a short film that took place nearly entirely in a dream, where I can play with that surrealist element where logic and reason doesn't necessarily have to matter. The original idea for Merry Madness was basically what this film ended up being. My initial idea was to make a surreal dreamscape slasher film centred around a horrible monster and a teenage girl, with very similar themes to what Scary and Strange ended up having. Keep in mind this was months and months and months ago, well before this short and well before Merry Madness. No design work had been done, and the Terrible Hound looked a lot more like this. A lot of the imagery and dialogue in this short film is exactly the same as that original script I wrote 5 or so months ago. I didn't love the idea though, and I'm much happier with the 2 short films that my surreal slasher script eventually evolved into. There are, however, still scraps of that original script in my Merry Madness sketchbook that show that the idea for this short film has been in my head for a very long time. A monster that feeds on those alone and introspective eats away at their mental state. She is asked if she's okay. She says yes. A monster pushes depressed teenage girl to the point of asking for help. The monster is finally satisfied. The monster helped her. And many more. This film was inspired by a really weird mix of different movies. Guillermo del Toro's and Jim Henson's films inspired the original, Pan's Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, but for this short, I was inspired more by slasher films. Stan Winston's Pumpkinhead and the Nightmare on Elm Street series were the biggest inspirations. These films inspired the initial idea of a teenage girl being haunted by a dream monster, but what this film eventually evolved into was very, very different from that, and of course ended up not being a slasher film at all. It warped to the point where I honestly don't even know what to compare this film to anymore. And I kind of love it when that happens. When a creation really develops a personality of its own. Creating strange, odd, surreal imagery I really love to do. Images like the hound's faceless, voiceless mouth within its monstery jaws, the catalyst of all of your nightmares hanging from your ceiling watching you as you sleep, and the nightmarish image of your safest place, your bedroom, in your house, in your home, being torn apart by a barbed wire beanstalk. This kind of wonderful and terrible nonsense is the reason I wanted to make this film in the first place, and I had a lot of fun doing it. Helping me along the way with this short film were a small collection of voice actors. I think this short has the most voice actors I've ever had in a single video, which is a good habit to keep up, I think. Cougar McDowell plays Emily's father, Kiri Quackenbush plays her mother, The Great Rat is played by me, and Adrian Cox returns to my short films and plays Emily. It's actually quite nice to collaborate with other people on these projects. Often it's just me doing everything, doing the voice acting and the art and the animation and so on, and it's really nice to just have a little bit of different blood in the film's veins sometimes. On the topic of voice acting, there's a character I didn't talk about, the Terrible Hound. The Terrible Hound is played by everybody, and her voice is entirely made from human sounds. No animal sounds or random foley, it's mostly me, snarling and growling and grunting, but her line of dialogue, the "You doing okay, sweetie," is actually a mix of everybody's voice, my own, Adrian's, Cougar's and Kiri's. I didn't want the Hound to have a voice of her own, but rather a collection of voices, all of the voices close to Emily. It seemed appropriate because this is Emily's nightmare, and at the heart of her nightmare isn't pain or death, it's simply being asked if you're okay by those around you, those who love you, and lying every single time, saying yes every single time. It's a small detail, but I kinda love it. Ding dong, spooky song, dong ding dong dong. The story is of a girl. She's clearly introverted and lonely. She's haunted by a terrible monster which represents her depression, but it's not the cause of it. The cause doesn't matter. She's outwardly happy and actively refuses help because this monster looming over her head, getting worse and worse, is part of who she is. It's been there half of her life. She expresses herself through her artwork and her paintings. She's proud of her art, and it's all about the terrible times and feelings that this monster gives her. This is who she is. This is her at what she considers her best, when she's miserable. So why would she ever want to get rid of it? Because this monster keeps getting closer and closer. She's upset, she's depressed, she's alone, she's having nightmares, and she hides it, and it's eventually going to tear her apart. She finally realizes this at the peak of her terrible dreams and admits she needs help. She needs to get rid of her monster. If you follow my stuff, this short film isn't exactly subtle about what it's trying to say. I recently got over an extremely rough patch in my life and I wrote this short film on that upswing as I was getting better. This short film essentially is about how overly romanticising and deliberately hanging on to your depression and your problems as a creative resource, not fixing them, can be extremely unhealthy for you. Now, I make art. It's what I do. I draw and I paint and I sculpt and I animate. For Merry Madness, and therefore Scary and Strange, I created this full 3D clay sculpture of the Hound while I was designing the monster. It's a design to represent depression, sickliness and horror, all things terrible, personal to me and otherwise. This design is a monument to all things bad. Right, now bear with me here. This random, unrelated painting I did last year is about purposefully avoiding the company of others. A self-imposed isolation out of fear of the horror of social commitment and family. This drawing, a few years old now and the start of a whole series of animated short films I've made, is about the innocence and naivety of youth, soon to be gone with age, and the shunning of those different or strange, discrimination and isolation. Take Neon Daddy. That whole short film is under the guise of a cheesy 80s B-movie, but it's all about self-hate. And then Don't Feed the Freaks, a near exact metaphorical retelling of my homeschooled teenage years, full of social alienation, a doomed search for purpose, and crippling isolation. Even as far back as my first attempt at animation, Parallel, it's all about loneliness and isolation. Isolation, and isolation, among other problems. Then finally, now we come to Scary and Strange, about how overly romanticising and deliberately hanging on to your depression and your problems as a creative resource can be extremely unhealthy for you. The girl in this short film, Emily, is me. My artwork is constantly reflecting the most terrible things I think and feel. My short films especially are based on my worst experiences, and many artists do this as an outlet to express and deal with their terrible times. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing, I think that's a great thing, and I'll continue to do it, but where exactly does that end? I do truly still feel that terrible times are just as important and essential as great times, but at what point are you defining yourself entirely on your terrible and not your great? I am very, very guilty of what Emily is doing, hanging on to terrible feelings and not fixing my problems because in a weird, twisted, overly romanticised way I feel I'm at my best when I'm at my most miserable. And I'm not. And I've finally been making an effort to fix that. If you're at all interested, I have another video covering in depth my design process creating the Terrible Hound, including that full 3D clay sculpture, and a similar video covering the Great Rat's design too. If you'd like to support me, please check out my Patreon page. I've got some weird and wonderful projects in the works, and the first anyone's ever going to hear about them will be there. You'll also be able to read my whole Merry Madness sketchbook with the additional, admittedly pitiful, 8 extra scary and strange pages. Bye guys. Happy song, happy song, I was gone.